I just wanted to thank everybody for coming along today. I was a bit concerned about the turnout, and I decided that maybe if it was low, I could blame it on last week's presenter. So it's great to see you all, because I was in the UK and I heard some emails about what happened last week, and I'm really annoyed that I missed it. I wrote to Francis for an unedited version and discovered he didn't keep one, so I'm very, very disappointed. I also felt, just before I dive into this session, that I'd like to update you on an earlier session that I conducted at Parliament House early in the year. Those of you who attended my Sergeant session may remember that I was really concerned about the possible extinction of George. And so I felt, in light of the recent events while I was in the UK, that I should notify you that Kate finally listened to me. And so I read an article in the paper that said that with the birth of Prince George, that there has already been a surge in babies being named George. So I'm here to announce that George can now come off the extinction list, and it seems pretty safe. While there, I attended also...
I'm not naming my son Youssef, don't even go there.
Well, you know, anyway. It's more interesting than Mark, so you can shush. Okay, so... Right, while there, I attended a meeting of the Rotary Club, the first Rotary Club founded outside of North America. I think Marion was the president of that club. I went there, is that right? Yeah, Marion, I went there on your recommendation. It was very, very interesting, very, very different, very different. I felt they'd taken the service above self to quite an extreme level. I think they've gone for ceremonial service above self. It was unbelievable. If we had the same here, Tony would be waiting outside. There would be a procession of people that would come in with Tony in the middle of that procession. We'd all rise. Tony would sit down, and then we'd all sit down. So I was just struck by how ceremonial that is. I might say I'm naive, but I haven't come across that before. So well worth attending. And the meeting went for 2.5 hours. Is that normal as well? No. Okay. Right. It was unbelievable. Anyway, today is about presenting the final draft of the first half of the strategic plan, and Derek's comments about he'd never seen a briefer strategic plan is correct. The first half of the strategic plan is getting the framework, or the foundation, in place, and as you'll see later in the presentation, I will need some help from you to write some of the meat of the strategy for some of the different parts of it. So it's deliberately about getting the framework correct, getting the overarching framework in place. So what I'm proposing today is to take you through the background and approach and help explain why some of you were maybe confused or a bit thrown by what you got. I got fantastic feedback, fantastic in terms of numbers. 18 or 19 of you wrote to me, and I replied to each of you, I believe, apart from one that arrived yesterday. I'll get onto that as soon as I can. And I've tried to absorb the feedback from you into this final version, so we'll see what you think. I guess live and die by today. I then want to just cover some points for you to consider when you are reviewing the strategic plan from today, because today's not about rubber stamping it and say we're done and dusted. Today's about showing you the final draft, but there's still going to be some time for you to come back with any final comments. So if any of you missed out on the first round, that's fine. There'll be about another week or so for you before we look to endorse it at the next board meeting on the 20th. I also want to just quickly show you the draft strategy, but I figure that most of you can read, so I'm not going to go into it in great detail. So I'll flick through that, and then I'll cover off the next steps with you if that's okay. Right, I want to talk to you about background and approach. I just want to acknowledge, make some acknowledgements. I just want to let you know that this hasn't been written from scratch. I did go back and look at Mark's effort, and I'm sorry if I've got names and places wrong, but I read through Mark's plan and also went through Helen's plan, the most recent strategic plan. That is it right to call it Helen's plan, Helen, or is it a group of you?
Carol Stigley.
Helen and Carol. Thank you, Carol. My apologies, but I read through, and so I believe what I've done is something that really, to use a phrase, stands on the shoulders of others, and so it's important that you don't think that this was written from scratch. I also want to thank Tony and the board for trusting me to come up with this first draft and go out to consultation with them and with the rest of you. The response has been great. The approach that I've taken with this is what I call inside-out consulting. That is where you come up with a straw man and then you go out to the group. The other approach is to go and consult with everybody and then try and make Frankenstein or something out of it. And I guess what I'd like you to do is to look at this and say to me, what's missing from it? Is there anything sort of clearly or obviously missing that needs to be in there? So take an exception-based approach. I wanted to go with a straw man and then send it out to consultation, because we all know what happens when committees sometimes get together. They can produce something that's not what you're expecting. And in the theme of Stephen's comments about Afghanistan, we all know that camel is is a horse designed by committee. So I'm hoping that what you're looking at is something that's a little bit more horsey or a bit more agile than a camel that doesn't spit. So that's just the background and approach to it. Some things I'd like you to consider. A couple of things I want to talk to you about to sort of set the scene. If you're not careful, a strategy can become either a strategy or a straitjacket. And so I'm really keen to make sure that this strategy doesn't fall into either one of those two, and I'll explain both. If people take a strategy and won't shift from that strategy, if they say, right, this is our strategy for the next 8 years, we're not going to shift, we're not going to be flexible, but then it becomes a straitjacket, and we're not able then to innovate. If we had taken that approach 4 or 5 years ago, as I know we didn't, then ideas like Eureka and jumbo tennis wouldn't have had the opportunity to come up for consideration and then be supported and become part of who we are. So I'm really keen in this, and I hope you'll see this, that there's an opportunity with this strategy to not be straitjacketed, to not to be locked in. Strategies are my word, which I use for strategies, which are beautiful to look at, ornate, complex, cover off everything, but then just sit there and do nothing. They're not alive. And so what I'm hoping here, and I've got the okay from Tony, is to provide you either with quarterly or monthly updates on how we're going against that strategy. And so I hope, with your support, that this strategy doesn't become a strategy or a straitjacket. And so I just wanted to emphasise that, because I don't want people thinking that we can arrogantly plan 8 years ahead. It just doesn't work. You can't write a plan for 8 years. I know the Soviets attempted it, but look where they are now. So from my perspective, it's got to be something that we can describe in detail what happens for the next couple of years, but I think we need to be revisiting it every year and then fleshing out the next year and so on as we get. I've got Lee's support in terms of having this plan at least in place for the next 2 years with Tony's and Lee's blessing. So I wanted to get that point across. The next thing I wanted to talk to you about was having breathing space. Strategies that don't have white space in them are not really great documents that promote innovation or changes in the environment. And so there are things called black swans. I don't know how much of you have heard of that technique or this management thing called black swans, but some guy a few years ago wrote a book about how most of what we're looking at today, most of what the technology that we're using today, most of the things that we're doing today were actually unplanned. And so we mustn't sort of forget the role of black swans, these things that just come along and disrupt what we're doing. So I've only been in the club 18 months, but if I had been here longer, I may be able to point to instances or times in our club's history where something has come along and maybe disrupted the club in some way, what we were doing, what we were hoping to do. I don't know. You're best to position that. Can I just ask for possible? Can anybody point to a black swan? Has it happened, or is it yet to come? No examples? Great. So this club's travelled without any black swan. Yeah, sorry?
Would associate membership be one?
Yeah, I suppose some new membership ideas. I think we're considering some new membership approaches. The Rotary International has given us the okay to consider new membership styles. So you could argue that when we tackle that could be something that disrupts our normal way of operating. We might need to look at maybe offering alternate meetings with different membership approaches, who knows. So it's really important that we factor in the black swan effect, and it's named after the fact that when the Dutch first arrived in Western Australia, up until that moment humans thought that swans were only white, and so for the first time ever humans spotted black swans, and that totally turned the whole science, if you like, of swanery upside down in terms of what we thought about what the reality was. So having space in the strategic plan is really, really important. The next principle I want to cover off with you is how going forward it'd be really important and really useful for us to know what are the types of initiatives and activities and charities and service that we want to support going forward. Understanding what those categories might be and holding that royal flush, those 5 categories of the types of activities we engage in is really useful, because we then start to set different expectations and different measurements of success around these different events and so on. So what are the things that we do which are mainly fellowship based? What are the things that we do which are about raising money? What are those things that we do which are a bit of fellowship and raising money and so on? So understanding where we focus our activities and what's the best mix of activities will also help us become more successful. So I hope that you see that in what you're going to see in a few minutes. So these are just some things for you to consider, I guess, before you critiqued the latest version of the strategic plan. And I guess finally there's 2 key points I'd like to get across, 2 principles that I believe in strongly, and I hope maybe some of you might agree with, and that is that just because we're voluntary doesn't mean we can't be professional. And so I think it's important that we don't be ashamed or a bit embarrassed maybe about having a strategic plan. I think that's really fundamental, and that we actually not only just write it and have it and tick that off, but we actually then measure ourselves against it. It's going to maybe look a little bit over the top every quarter, sitting down and judging how we've gone in the last quarter in that dimension or in that dimension, but I actually think there's nothing that says just because we're voluntary that we can't be professional and achieve what we want to achieve. And the second concept is a bit esoteric, I suppose, but I've read some strategies written in the past for this club and maybe in other areas, and I've just noticed that some people regard clubs as a person, and I really struggle with that concept. I don't think there's anybody in this room whose name is Rotary Club of Wellington, and so I struggle with the idea that we treat the club as an entity, and I believe that that when it gets down to it, each person in this club is a member of that club, so you can't come into this club and sit in the chair and hide and think that you are now you are the club. I believe that ultimately there is no personality of the club. I believe that it's made up of us as individuals. I know it seems a bit trite, but and I think that collectively, when we all contribute and we aggregate that contribution and we aggregate our attendance and our activity and our energy, then you do have this aggregated thing called the club of members. So that was just another thing that drove some of the thinking behind the strategy. Right, I'm sure you're all aware of the 7 deadly sins. Now I just wanted to present the plan against those 7 deadly sins because there are some deadly sins that come with planning or not planning. And I just want to start off with wrath. I wanted to make sure that nobody got too upset about the plan. The plan's not complete, so please don't commit the sin of getting upset or cranky about the plan. You've had an opportunity to have an input into it. You still have, and if you still think it's completely devoid of any merit, come and discuss it with me and Tony, and we will look to accommodate that. But I've had 18 and 19 emails in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and I've tried to accommodate, and I've responded to each of you and tried to pick up some key points that you were making and tried to put that into the plan. And again, if you've got any issues, come and talk to me about it. But I'd rather you were frank and open with me about it rather than mutter about it later and be really kind either to my face or to the club or to Tony about it. So if we can avoid wrath, that'd be really good. Sloth. Sloth is a really easy thing to do. The response might be that, look, what's the point of having a plan? We know what we're doing, we're pretty busy. But to guard against sloth, it's great to have a plan. Where are we going? What are we trying to do? Know what we have to do. Because if we don't know where we're going, as the old adage says, then any road will get you there. So I think it's really important that we know where we want to head in 2021. And I'd encourage you to participate and understand what your role is inside the plan. Pride. This is a tricky one because when a presentation was given about one of the strategies, 2 strategies ago, both Tony and I got some feedback verbally and in emails that some of the language used in the past was okay then, but people feel a bit uncomfortable with it now. Now, I had a choice of not talking about it or talking about it, and I've gone with talking about it, so bear with me. But things like preeminent and some of those labels were considered maybe okay for then, but people didn't feel comfortable about it now. And so what I would say that is that it's important that we're proud of the club's achievements, but I think some of the language needed to be removed and changed. It's not about being politically correct, or maybe it is, I don't know, but it's more about saying that these external tags should come from others, not from us. So what we need to do is chart a course that we're comfortable with, that we think is going to be great. And if others want to call us this or that, preeminent, blah, 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 that's their call. I just don't think that we should go about strategising deliberately with that in mind. And so I just want to let you know that for some of you who wrote back to me and said that you wanted some of that language restored, that's where I and the board are coming from, and I hope you get that. So we're not saying we're not the preeminent club, we just don't think it's appropriate to put that down in a strategic document, and that's something that others might want to label us, and good luck to them. Greed. How big will our club grow? And I don't know. It's going to be you as a group who are going to help us decide. When's enough is enough. Who was it? Somebody said they went to the Seattle club. Oh, Richard. That's right. I watched the video from last week, and Richard said that the Seattle club had 650 people in it. Yeah, they're still okay. So who knows? It might be that 300 is too many. It might be that 600 is not enough. I don't know. So just have a think about that. And do we want to be in a situation where we're sort of sucking up, I guess, all the Rotary resources within the Wellington city area? We've got 8 fellow clubs in the area. So how much? So it's just something to think about when we're writing our strategies, or when you're contributing your feedback. And then envy. Well, if we do our job really well, that might be the other club's problems, not ours. So, you know, it's, from my perspective, we just get on and we do the best that we can. And if others are envious, well, that's their issue. But I don't think we should, you know, engage in any of that in our strategic plan. So there's some of the deadly sins. There's a couple more for later. I had to keep some up my sleeve for later in the presentation. So those of you who know your 7 off by heart, you'll know that I'm going to be struggling with the other 2, and I did, and I'll come clean in a few minutes. Right, so the draft strategy that we're going to look at today considers things like purpose, statement of intent and vision, strategic outcomes, strategies and values. So what we've tried to do is cover off the key questions that you would typically want to ask about our club. Why are we here? Why do we get together? What's the purpose behind it? And what does our club look like in 2021? And how do we know whether we've been successful? And then how will we achieve it? And by when? And by whom? Who in the club? When are we going to do it? How are we going to do it? And then the principles that we will use. So I know some of this is management speak, but you know, like I said before, just because we're a voluntary organisation doesn't mean we need to be you know, amateur about it. This is language that's common in business, and it's something that should bring a lot of focus to what we're trying to do. So on a page, that's what the strategic plan looks like. You wouldn't have seen this before. This is a wonderful diagram that Andrew Jackson, in his feedback to me, gave me, which was great. And that was just about outlining it in a way that maybe made the document easier to read and understand. I'm very grateful to Andrew for that. And so you can see that really we've just done the top half of the strategy. And I'm just trying to nail the top half. And once we've got the structure and the layout correct, then we will crack on with writing the strategies for each of those 4 visions, if you like. So I'm hoping that might clear up maybe why some of you thought it was very light. You know, it's only stage 1 at this point. Okay, so I'll just quickly take you through it. The purpose, the statement of intent. There's been some font issues with going from 2013 to 2010, but that's all right. Statement of intent, that should read. Then there's the 4 visions, the strategic outcomes. Each of those elements that make up those visions. And then, finally, the strategies that are yet to be developed, along with the values underpinning everything that we do. So I've used 4 words in there. So the actual statement of intent is to be a strong, dynamic and active service club that makes an effective and vital contribution to the City of Wellington and beyond. Now that is a statement almost entirely written by you in this room, because it started out simpler and I accommodated some great ideas, and that's what we've arrived at. So breaking that down, what were the key elements? And the 4 key elements were strong, dynamic, active and contribution. And so what I've tried to do is sort of bring, if you like, some order to this at the top. Strong refers to us as a club. So some of you said, I found this document a bit internally focused. Well, yes, it's possible that you just got as far as strong and gave up. And if you kept going, you would have seen there were other elements in there. So the strong bit is about us as a club. The dynamic bit is about our external activity with the community. So it's about our strategic partnerships, it's about engagement with the community and so on. The active refers to our activity and our relationships within the Rotary community. They're arbitrary definitions. So dynamic, we've just made that external, and active is about our relationship with our Rotary brethren. So people from Rotaract, who I didn't know were coming, but you're up there, and so we want to work more closely with you guys. It's our intent, maybe in a more, if you like, a planned and measured way over the next 8 years at least. And then contribution, the actual stuff that we contribute to the community. So I know some of you said that it was a bit internally. I know most of you thought it was great, so I'm not trying to blow up one group over the other in terms of the feedback, but I just want you to understand what those 4 words meant in terms of how that drives in everything that we do. And so as you can see, the plan is to write a strategy for each of those 4 visions, and then we'll be reporting back to you on a regular basis how we're all doing as a group against those targets or those measurements. So the trick will be now to understand what sort of membership do we want to have in 2021, what does fellowship mean in 2021, and so on for each of those, and then how we're going to get to that point and come back to you with it. So that was the purpose of this. I wanted something that was easy to read. Hopefully we can put that on an A4 or an A3 depending on your eyesight, and basically make sure that it's a modular thing, something that we might want to add or easily add or shrink or keep flexible and so on. Now the actual final, if you like, final draft, I could read this out word for word, but I won't. But basically I'm just going to sort of reasonably quickly go through the slides, but basically you'll see that a lot of your feedback, some of you will recognise your own words, and don't worry, all this is going to go out in an email after today's meeting for you to review at leisure. I didn't think it would be very interesting to read it out word for word, and you'll see in there that we've picked up some feedback from you. And so these are the visions, and then for each of those visions, what are the things that we want the club to look like in 2021, and you have a chance to have an input in that. I'll be going out to consultation saying, what does membership look like to you, what does so on and so on look like in 2021. And then our values, I eventually got what I thought was a great sentence, which was around respect for history, traditions and origin, grounded in the past but facing the future. And also somebody suggested a further sentence which I thought was quite interesting around always seeking better ways to carry out our activities while remaining inclusive, non-political and energetic in all that we do as part of our values. So the next step really is to connect with the subcommittees and understand how you could help compose those strategies for each of those themes, and then engaging in the quarterly or monthly updates of the plan to make sure that our strategy doesn't become a strategy because we don't do anything about it at all. So I'm going to need help at this point, but the first things first, I'm going to send this document out to people, and I'm looking for some general consensus that we've got that top end of the strategy right. And like I said, there's still time for you to contribute. I'm targeting, what's today, the 12th? I'm targeting tomorrow week when we might rubber stamp it. So you need to, crack on with your feedback as soon as you can. And then finally, there's 2 more deadly sins, and gluttony. So just watch what we eat at our weekly meetings, and lust. Couldn't work this one in, but just remember, lust is good for you. It keeps you young. And so don't forget to have small doses of lust even at our weekly meetings. Thank you very much. For each of these we need smarts for 2021, and then the strategy is how we're going to, for the first 2 years, try and achieve those, and then every year write the next year as we get to 2021. Is that okay, Peter? Cool.
Stunned.
That's all right.
Well done.
It's either good or bad. All right.